Well, good morning. This is an experimental video just to explain something about the cemetery or the indications of a cemetery here in Vila Velha alongside the church, the oldest church in Brazil. This cemetery we've found complete skeletons. They're in position of burial. They're on their back, lying on their backs with their hands over the pelvic area. These have been exposed by the rain and the passing of vehicles over the site. And to give us some idea of the age of these burials or this cemetery, we are lucky enough to have found pottery shards, clay pipes, that all indicate a very narrow period here in the history of Vila Velha. The Dutch period here is unlike Recife. Recife and Olinda were taken in 1630 until 1654. Here in Vila Velha, the Dutch presence was only of 13 years. The Dutch eventually took Vila Velha 3 years after their arrival in the area, and they were pushed out of here in 1646 and forced to retire to their fort at Orange, which is just 2.5 kilometers along the beach. And they were there for the next 8 years, while the rest of the island and Vila Velha were back under Portuguese control. So anything that we find here in Vila Velha of the Dutch period, it's fairly safe to assume that it was deposited here in that 13-year period. Now, what we have alongside these graves here in the village are very positive indications of the Dutch presence here. And these are at the same archaeological level, or say at the same level in the ground, as the bones. So this rather indicates. Now what we have shards, fragments of pottery, tin glazed pottery, which is of that period. This is the blue and white pottery, the blue being resulting from cobalt that was used to give those blue patterns on the pottery. That was used because they had not yet discovered how to use other colorants that could withstand the high temperatures. That's why there is a predominantly amount of blue and white pottery, because they couldn't use any other color. They hadn't found any pigments that could withstand the high temperatures. But the other shards that are in immediate association with the bones are crackware shards. Now this is extremely interesting because crackware is Chinese porcelain. Now this was at the beginning of the 17th century. This was taken to Holland by the Dutch East Indies Company. That's the company that was formed previously to the Dutch West Indies Company, which was the company that was here. These were in fact more military organisations than trading companies, although their interest was, of course, like everyone else in the world, they were interested in profit. But the Dutch East India Company bought this crackware, which is from the end of the Ming Dynasty. I'm sure most people have heard of the Ming Dynasty and the incredible value of Ming pottery. Well, they took this porcelain from China and took it to Holland, where it became very popular. It was also extremely expensive. And so the fact that some of it turned up here to be broken in that period, that 13-year period, is quite remarkable. And it would have been only very rich people who would have brought that here. One would imagine either very, very rich businessmen or officers from the Dutch West Indies Company. But anyway, we have it here, and the interesting thing about this is that in Europe they didn't manage to reproduce this type of porcelain until more than 200 years later. The Chinese kept this technique under wraps, and it wasn't until the 18th century that 18th and 19th century that they were able to reproduce this pottery. Now here are some actual shards that were found here alongside the church. Now this is crackware pottery. I presume you can see it there. This is hand painted. Now one of the interesting things about this is when I found these, I actually wasn't aware of what they were. In fact, I thought it was modern because it's such fine quality. But of course, investigating, I found out that it is actually crackware. And one of the most interesting things is that it is translucent. I guess you can see that, but there it is, a torch behind it. And you can see the light travels through it there. There's the hand-painted pattern on that. You can see there how thin this is. Here we have another piece. This is more densely painted. This is in fact the foot ring from probably a small bowl. There you can see the hand-painted in cobalt. Now this is what is called in English bone china. Now, why did that come about? What has it got to do with bones? Well, it's not our bones here. It was in the experiments that were done in England to try and copy this this porcelain, which they didn't know how to make. They tried all sorts of things. They tried mixing into the kaolin, the white clay, all sorts of elements, all sorts of other material. And one of the things that they tried and had some success with was ground up bones. And being white, and I'm not sure what bones they used, I doubt they were human bones, but that's how this type of porcelain came to be called in England bone china. And China, of course, referring to its origin, where it came from. When we call porcelain and pottery stuff China in English, that's what we're referring to, that 400 years ago, the good quality, the rich people's tableware came from China. So that is some of that we have other very interesting ceramic pieces that are found not in the cemetery. This was found just down the road, but this is part of a Bartman jug. This is stoneware from Germany. There's another smaller piece. This too is from that period to this probably, although there was this stoneware in Europe in general, this was probably brought here by the Dutch. This here we have, these are Dutch bricks. These are Issel bricks. This one is very interesting because it still has some of the argamassa, some of the mortar that was used, made with lime. This was long before the invention of cement, or Portland cement as we know it today. Now these bricks came from Holland. In the first few years that the Dutch were here, they were too busy fighting to have any time to safely make bricks. So any building they did in the first roughly the first 5 years that they were here in Brazil, was done with bricks that they brought from Holland as ballast in the ships. And these bricks were made of this particular yellow clay that is found alongside the river Isel. I think it's Zealandia. And that's how they are called Isel bricks. And those are found, they were used in the construction of Fort Orange, just down the road here. And some of the buildings here in Vila Velha were expanded or built using these Dutch bricks. I believe that the prison and council chambers, the Portuguese had a wonderful idea of putting the two things together. The council chambers, where the town councillors would meet, was on the first floor upstairs, and underneath was the jail, which is awfully convenient. A brilliant idea. But the Dutch, I believe, found that it wasn't big enough for them, and they extended it using these yellow Dutch bricks. I found them there behind where the prison and council chambers were, where we can still see where they are, because of the foundations are still there with very large cut calcareous rocks. The stone foundations for the original building are still there. In 1979, the authorities built a water tank and tower on top of it, which is a shame, but there we are. And there we are. So there are lots of indications of the Dutch presence here in Vila Velha. And this is to be completely understood as Vila Velha is the oldest European settlement in Brazil. From 1503, this village has been populated with a fort, and I don't mean Fort Orange down the road. The Vila Velha had its own fortress and trading post, and it is in fact, it's been here since 1503.